I think we're all hoping that, like, Brian Thomas Jr. goes there, or possibly Adonai Mitchell or Xavier Worthy, whoever you like. You're hoping that they go there.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Fantasy Football Freaks. He's Vaz, I'm Jason, and we are continuing on with our videos of the best landing spots for each of the position groups. We've already done quarterbacks and running backs, so go and take a look at those videos if you haven't done so yet. Today, we go over the top landing spots for wide receivers. Vaz, you've spent a lot of time putting this list together, the best possible landing spots for wide receivers, and I kind of feel like every team needs a wide receiver, but at the same time, how did you come up with this list?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. So I looked at team needs, and it's amazing that I think like 29 out of the 32 teams have receiver listed as like a top 5 need. It's absurd. Everybody needs receivers. So yeah, I looked at team needs, and I just, used some common sense about who's already on the depth chart, and then like their quarterback situation, their offensive situation, and put together a list of tiers starting from F tier, D tier, C tier, B tier, A tier, and S tier.
Okay, so instead of a specific number of top, because hey, they all need wide receivers, we're going to start off by going into tiers before we get to the top 10 or so teams. So let's start off then with F tier. Who are the F tier teams that actually need a wide receiver that would be essentially a bad landing spot for wide receivers?
Oh yeah, so it's highly likely that these teams do not draft a receiver in the top 3 or 4 rounds. Maybe they draft a receiver in like round 4 to be like a depth piece or like a special teams ace or something like that. But I doubt, I'd be surprised if these teams draft a receiver. And they are the Eagles, the Raiders, the Vikings, and the Seahawks.
Mm-hmm.
All 4 of these teams have very strong receiver rooms, established top 2 receivers. And surprisingly enough, all 4 teams don't really have a quarterback in place who throws for a ton of yardage. So if a receiver did go to one of these 4 locations, it would be an F tier location.
Yeah, I think looking at that list, it's pretty self-explanatory and no pushback whatsoever. Yeah, if you're a wide receiver, those are teams that you don't want to end up with, and honestly, probably won't end up with. Let's take a look at your D tier of teams and their needs for wide receivers and the wide receivers' willingness to avoid these teams.
Right. So in D tier, I've got the Rams, the Titans, the Buccaneers, and the Commanders. The reason I have these 4 teams is I feel like their landing spots would be slightly better than F tier, but only slightly. All 4 of these teams have established receivers in place, like already established top 2 receivers in place. So if a receiver goes there in like round 2 or 3, there's not gonna be a lot of targets available. The reason that they are slightly ahead of the F tier is probably because they have an established quarterback in place who can throw for slightly more yardage, or they have slightly older or unproven receivers in front of them.
Okay. Once again, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Let's take a look at the C tier, which is the biggest tier.
All right. So the C tier, I'll list them first. Okay, we've got the Carolina Panthers, Denver Broncos, Detroit Lions, Dolphins, Cleveland Browns, Green Bay Packers, New York Jets, New Orleans Saints, and Indianapolis Colts, as well as the Chicago Bears, who I will get into a little bit more in a moment. But I won't get into everyone here, but the reality is in this tier, these teams either have a shaky QB situations or crowded depth charts. So they're not particularly good landing spots. I will say about Chicago, though, because I've seen a receiver mocked there at pick 9 a few times. I think if a top end receiver gets drafted to Chicago in pick 9, it would be elevated to B tier for me. Because I have them in C tier because if, like, let's say Chicago drafts a 3rd round receiver, then I think it's going to be hard to move up the depth chart. But if they draft a receiver at pick 9, I think that starting next year, Keenan will be gone and they'd be in an elite offense to demand targets starting from next season. But as we've seen with JSN, if you don't get a lot of yardage and put up a lot of stats in year one, your dynasty stock could take a hit. So I don't particularly like this landing spot regardless. So that's why it is here in C tier.
Okay. So, I mean, if you're a Dunze and you end up with the Bears, you're not going to mind as much
Right.
as, let's say, if you were Leggett and you ended up with Chicago, you're probably not going to be quite as happy.
Precisely.
All right. Let's take a look at your B tier.
Okay, B tier. So B tier, I've got four teams here: San Francisco 49ers, Baltimore Ravens, Cincinnati Bengals, and Dallas Cowboys. I think all four teams would be good landing spots now. So B tier, we're getting to a situation where I'd be happy if a receiver gets put here. Okay. The reason is pretty simple. All four of these have good offenses. They've got established good quarterbacks, and they've got some question marks at receiver. So, like, for example, in San Francisco, if Debo and Ayuk stayed, it wouldn't be great. But there's been rumblings that Ayuk could be traded. So I think there's opportunity if a receiver gets drafted there. And then, Dallas has got like a potential for a wide receiver 2 maybe to step in, or wide receiver 3, and Dak can throw possibly for 5,000 yards. Baltimore doesn't really have a number 2 receiver. And then the Bengals are, T. Higgins is demanding a trade. So who knows what's happening there. So I think all four teams have a bit of a crowded depth chart, but great offenses, great quarterbacks, and the potential for a great landing spot. So that's
All
why they're
right.
B tier.
Sure. All right. And let's take a look then to our A tier. These are 5 to 10. So 6 teams in this tier that you've got.
Right. So let's do number 10 and 9 together. Let's
Okay.
slow down a little bit for this. Okay. So 10 and 9 together, I've got the New England Patriots and the New York Giants. The reason I'm pairing these two together is because they're awfully similar. They don't really have great quarterbacks in place, and their depth charts are wide open. So I have them ahead of those teams in B tier, even though their quarterback situations are kind of murky, because the depth chart is wide open. So I think if any receiver goes there in round 2 or round 3, they'd have potentially a lot of opportunity to demand targets, to supplant other receivers on the depth chart. And then if a top end talent gets there, they should be immediately established as the number 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly an opportunity, and 2 teams that definitely need wide receivers, but they have so many other needs as well. Do both those teams? Who do you want to look at next?
Okay, number 8, I've got the Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay, I think Pittsburgh is a great landing spot for a receiver. They have a ton of targets that left the building with Deontay Johnson. They've got an improved quarterback in Russell Wilson or potentially Justin Fields. So I think it would be a great landing spot. And then even George Pickens doesn't demand a lot of targets. So I think they've got a lot of targets available. An above average quarterback who's playing for his future, as you've said in previous videos. So I think Pittsburgh is a great landing spot at number 8. So next is Atlanta. So I moved Atlanta to 6 because I think I'm not fully bought into Darnell Mooney as a wide receiver 2. And I think Kirk Cousins throws for a ton of yards. He's just always airing it out. And you know what? We're not even sure about Pitts. We don't know if Pitts can get a ton of yardage. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to be in a great offense, to be the number 2 receiver. I think there's plenty of opportunity to gain targets in a great offense, and a lot of potential to score fantasy points as well. So I do like this landing spot quite a bit.
Yeah, especially if you're talented enough to supplant some of the other targets in there, then being a part of a Kirk Cousins offense, as mentioned, it would be ideal. Who
Yeah.
is number 5 on your list?
Okay, number 5. So the top team in the A tier is the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the reason I have them here is like Calvin Ridley just left, so there's a bunch of targets available. T. Law, he's a good quarterback. He'll throw for 4,500 yards, I imagine, season to season. And then their top weapons in Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk, good players, but I don't really look at either of them and say, "Oh, these are elite players. They're number 1 receivers." So I think there is a potential for a receiver to come in, start off as a number 2, and work their way up to being T. Law's favorite target. So if I have a receiver that lands in Jacksonville, I'd be thrilled at the landing spot.
Yeah, I think we've used this word before with receivers like Ingram and Kirk. Is they're good receivers, but they don't scare you, right? Like
Right.
Tyreek Hill scares you. Certain receivers scare you, and they don't really make that list for me. Let's take a look at your S tier, your top 4 landing spots for wide receivers through the upcoming NFL draft.
Okay, number 4, I've got the Kansas City Chiefs. And I mean, I think I don't need to go into this one too much. You know, they've got the best quarterback in football. They've got I thought they had 2 good receivers in Hollywood Brown and Rashee Rice. Hollywood Brown's on a 1-year contract. Rashee Rice just officially changed his name to Crashy Rice. So who knows what's going to happen there. And so, yeah, like there's potential to play with Patrick Mahomes. There's potential to play with him for the next 4 to 5 years. So I love this landing spot for any young receiver that comes in, even if they have to start as a number 3 option. You know, and then Kelsey's getting older too. So fantastic landing spot.
Yeah, and I'm sure every single wide receiver will be saying, I hope that's where I go to get to play with Patrick Mahomes, as mentioned. But there are still 3 better landing spots, in your opinion. What's number 3 on your list?
Now, I can't do it for you. The inches we need are everywhere around us. What are you going to do? Like! Subscribe!
So from this point on, we're actually redoing our top 3 wide receiver locations because of the Stephon Diggs trade. So Vaz, now that there's been some movement, we're resetting here, and you've actually changed your 3rd best location for a rookie wide receiver this year.
Right. So yeah, before the Diggs trade, I had Buffalo in this spot, but now I have the Cardinals in this spot. So I love this landing spot for the Arizona Cardinals. You know, Kyler Murray, more than any quarterback I've seen, loves to target one guy, and I think that they're going to draft a receiver high, probably at number 4, probably getting Marvin Harrison at 4. I think there's a chance they move back and maybe select Neighbors or Rome or somebody like that. But regardless, I think it's an excellent landing spot because there are so many targets available with Hollywood leaving and then no true like talented wide receiver on the roster. So I think whoever goes there, getting a ton of targets, a lot of scoring opportunities, ascending offense, I really love the landing spot.
You know, this year's wide receiver class being as talented as it is, as you mentioned, the big 3, but also as deep as it is, and Arizona just really being empty in their wide receiver room with Hollywood Brown being gone. You think it could still be a decent landing spot if they took a 2nd wide receiver, let's say in the 2nd or 3rd round?
Yeah, I think it could be. There's a wide open spot at wide receiver 1, but I think there's also a wide open spot at wide receiver 2 on the step chart, which I believe like Michael Wilson probably is right now. But he was just a kind of a surprise 3rd round pick last year. So let's say they target wide receiver in round 1 and then again in round 3 or something. I think the wide receiver 3 has an excellent the wide receiver who would have been drafted in the 3rd round would have an excellent spot at earning either the 2nd or 3rd spot on the depth chart. So yeah, I think it is a great spot for even somebody not drafted in like the top 10 of the NFL draft.
All right. Well, more reason why the Arizona Cardinals is an excellent landing spot for a wide receiver. Let's take a look at number 2 on your list of landing spots for wide receivers.
Yes, number 2 would be the LA Chargers. I think this is a pretty obvious one. They've got a very good quarterback in Justin Herbert, who's very capable of throwing for like 5,000 yards in a season and, possibly 30 touchdowns. They've got no real wide receiver 1 on their roster. Probably it's Joshua Palmer or they hope it's Quentin Johnson, but I think both of them are suited as like a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3 on a depth chart. So highly likely at 6 overall, they go receiver. I think it's an excellent landing spot. I think a ton of targets available with Keenan Allen leaving, with Mike Williams leaving. Excellent landing spot.
Yeah. The only thing I wonder, like we saw with the Stephon Diggs trade, is it possible that maybe like a T. Higgins or a Brandon Ayuk or someone gets traded over? Nothing like that has happened yet, as of us redoing this portion of the segment. But at the same time, we'll see what happens through the upcoming draft. And as mentioned, the latest trade has actually affected your top spot on this list, which obviously is the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, yeah. So I had Buffalo Bills at 3, but yeah, losing Diggs is massive. They have a wide open depth chart now. You know, Josh Allen has his top receivers. I don't even know who his top receiver. Maybe Curtis Samuel. Like there's just so many targets available. In one of the best offenses in football, one of the best, probably the best fantasy quarterback in football. So they're most likely going receiver in the first round, I'd imagine. And then whoever goes to the Bills at the end of round 1 is going to shoot up draft boards. You know, they're going to be considered in the top 7 or 8 picks probably in the rookie draft. So amazing landing spot going to the Bills. I think we're all hoping that, like, you know, Brian Thomas Jr. goes there, or possibly Adonai Mitchell or Xavier Worthy, whoever you like, you're hoping that they go to the Bills.
Maybe a trade up to get one of the big 3 as well for the Bills. Who
Oh,
knows?
that's going to be hard, but yeah,
Yeah.
maybe.
And of course, remember the one caveat that we do have to mention again, much like San Diego, I think there's a possibility. Who knows how big the possibility is? But as we saw with the trade of Diggs, there are a couple of people that seem to possibly be on the trade block in T. Higgins and Brandon Ayuk. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of those guys landed in Buffalo, but certainly if neither do, then easily Buffalo and the Chargers clearly have to be the 2 top landing spots for receivers minus trades.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, like I think if you're going to see a big name player traded, it probably happens during the draft. And the way I would see that happening to Buffalo would be like, say they didn't go wide receiver in round 1. Say they targeted like a defensive player in round 1, and then they decide to trade like their second round pick for a Brandon Ayuk or something like that. I could see that happening, and they go receiver in that route. But you know, the draft is so deep at receiver that it's possible they don't go receiver in round 1 and then target receiver in round 2. So if that happens, then you know, like a second tier talent at receiver is going to shoot up draft boards. You know, like for example, if like Keon Coleman slips to the middle of the second round or the back end of the second round, and they draft him, Coleman is going to shoot up, despite how many people are down on him. You know, if he's going to the Bills, he's going to shoot up draft boards.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very interesting to see. Somebody's going to be a big riser.
Much like Rashee Rice was last year, going into the draft, wasn't seen as that level of talent, but certainly going to Kansas City, of course, that
You mispronounced his name though.
Rashee Rice.
Yeah. Crashy Rice. Crashy Rice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think he officially changed it.
My bad. Yeah, of course. And all sorts of stuff, of course, going on with him these days with the car accident. We'll have to see what happens with discipline on that in the future. But there you have it. Those are the top landing spots for wide receivers through the NFL draft. And as mentioned, sometimes, you know, talent is very important, obviously, but sometimes draft spot can be just as, if not more important to some of these wide receivers and what their value is going to be once the draft is finished. So watch for that. Great job, Vaz, of course. So we're going to be doing one more list, as we do have the tight end landing spots to go through as well. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you are up to date as soon as we upload that video as well. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on another edition of Fantasy Football Freaks.